Hi, I'm Kathleen Murf+E, and welcome to Murf+E Unfiltered, Zero BS Biz Talk. I'm here with my co-host, Eliot Grossman. How are you, Eliot?
I'm doing great, Murph. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
All right.
Well, as always, I'm generally pretty excited about most of the topics that we're discussing, but this one is particularly near and dear to my heart, especially since so many people are suffering based on what we're going to be talking about today, but there's no need to be. So that's what we're going to talk about, some solutions for people that are suffering.
Absolutely.
Because they're on a dysfunctional team. So most people at some point in their career are on one of these unfortunate teams, but it doesn't have to be that way. And a lot of times people, they suffer kind of in silence, thinking that there's nothing that they can do, that they just have to deal with the fact that they're on this terrible team. But that's really not the case. So what if you were able to describe your team as an epic one? And if you're not currently on one, today we're going to be talking about a number of different ways that potentially you can turn that around, if in fact you are on that dysfunctional team. So let's hop right in here, and I'm going to ask you the question, have you ever been on a dysfunctional team?
Yeah, so when you sent me the topic last week, I started thinking a lot about it. And I've actually been on two dysfunctional teams. I've been on many epic teams, but I've been a manager and had to report to other folks, and I've been on as a sales person on dysfunctional teams. And it makes getting out of bed in the morning really challenging.
Sure does.
Right? From the manager side, I look at it this way. I think it's twofold. Number one, I think you can either stem from the team manager or the team leader down, or when you have negative players on that team, they drag a team down. And I know we're going to discuss that a little bit more as we go along, but for sure, it's not everybody always thinks it's the team leader. It's always the manager's fault. It is not always the case. I would say that in a couple situations, it's 50-50.
Exactly. So in other words, what you're telling me that what made maybe some of the dysfunctional teams that you were on was not in fact the leader, which is the person that everyone generally points to. They don't necessarily consider that sometimes it could even be them that's causing the dysfunction.
Sure, absolutely. Now, I'm not saying we were on a dysfunctional team together. It didn't start out that way, but we got there. We did, and it became dysfunctional. It became a very toxic situation.
I think I left before it got to the toxic level. I was lucky. I think I...
Well, once again, it proves that you're smarter than I am. But it got toxic, and it became a very challenging and unhealthy situation.
Sure.
And eventually, everybody left.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way.
It doesn't.
But we talk about the other side of it that you're discussing now. You know, the inmates want to run the asylum, right?
Yes.
That old saying, the inmates want to run the asylum. How about if the inmates actually work together with the leader to make the asylum a better place?
That's a novel idea.
Right.
And a marvelous one.
And it can happen. But
it absolutely can.
You know, absolutely. So I know we're going to move on, so I want you to, jump in.
Sure. So most teams are in fact cyclical. So if they're in a dysfunctional phase, they're at some point going to come out of it. Or they implode and the team just basically vaporizes.
Right.
That doesn't often happen. Generally, a team will get fixed and they will go about finding a way to have a solution to right all the troubles that team is happening.
Yep.
And the leaders, of course, they strongly influence the functioning level of a team. But as you pointed out, it's not always the leader that's really at fault. Sometimes it's other factors that we're going to be talking about that contribute to it. And we also talked about the fact that it's occasionally a single individual, or worse, it's two individuals that kind of gang up and they just really change the overall nature and flavor of the team.
That's exactly
and sour it.
Sure, of course.
And that's really unfortunate. So we've talked about the fact that you've been on a dysfunctional team. I've been on several of them myself as well. And not that I think we wear this with a proud badge of honor, but there are things that we can also learn from being on these dysfunctional teams in terms of maybe what not to repeat, or if we start to see symptoms of a dysfunctional team propping up, that we can do something about it, which is good. So I would say most people, if they haven't been on a dysfunctional team yet, they will be.
Yeah, just wait.
It's just
right?
a matter of
like the
of
New England
time.
weather, right? Things are going to change.
Precisely,
Yeah.
exactly. And then so having to manage and contend with a team or individual that's contributing to that dysfunction. What have you done as a leader to address that?
Well, I think what you mentioned before is the learned side of things. So when you are a salesperson or a different manager and you learn from somebody else what not to be,
right,
or what you think will not help. So I've learned a few things. Number one, from the manager's side, I've always learned, there was 3 things I learned. Nothing was ever good enough.
True.
Always walking on eggshells. It's okay to be a micromanager if it's, and I think we did an episode, I could, but not to the point where your subordinates or your direct reports become uncomfortable, and then it becomes a little bit negative and toxic, and not really understanding boundaries, personal and professional.
Right.
Don't call me at 9 o'clock at night.
Right.
We have lives. It's not my fault that you don't. So those are some of the things. What I was able to do, and what I was able to look at is, that leads to the dysfunction. So I think the best part you can do is you take away what's good. How do you deal with it? Well, it's easy to deal with. Number one, if you have folks that you feel are a good team, and you should, if you're a leader, you got to make the changes.
Right.
But here's one of the things. You asked me to talk about one of the things. Well, this is the most important part to me. Ask everybody on the team, not just your senior people that you feel are the leaders, but also the newer folks, because everybody's voice matters on these teams. And in order to avoid dysfunction and just think, well, he or she are only listening to the top level folks and the leading salesperson or the best marketing person or whatever it may be, talk to everybody.
Right.
Get some input, because I think what that builds is team cohesion.
It does.
I think it builds trust and respect for you as a leader, and then trust and respect amongst your team. So I think those are very simple things to do. Talk about it yourself.
So I would agree with everything that you just said, and one of the points that I'm going to key off of is especially the boundary setting principle, because that's inordinately important to establish those boundaries, because oftentimes it's when the boundaries are crossed constantly, not just some of the time, but constantly, that contributes, not mildly, but very significantly to a dysfunctional team.
Right.
And it can be very different types of boundaries. It can be calling you at 7 a.m. in the morning and expecting you to be in the office in 20 minutes when you have an hour commute away. And why are they calling you at that time anyways?
Right.
To talk to you about which paperclip you're going to put on that sheet of paper. What do you really need to
right. So
discuss that?
I want you to hold that thought. And I promised you in our green room that I wasn't going to interrupt you, but I'm interrupting you real quick. I worked for a person who would call me, and not an exaggeration, at 6:15 in the morning while I was driving into work, and then would call me at 7:30 at night while they were driving home from work.
Oh, great.
And I had young children at the time. I put up with it for a while, and when I was tired of it, I brought it to this person's attention, like, listen, I get it. This isn't time where I'm just listening to sports radio or whatever it may be. I'm trying to figure out my day, my plan, how things are going, and work, and at the end of the day, what can we do better as a team? Because I was leading a team, not a salesperson. This was my, my manager.
Sure.
It became so bad when I told that person, all of a sudden, I'm the villain.
Oh.
And it was awful. And it was awful.
So blame the victim.
Blame the victim.
Yeah, classic dysfunctional management trait.
Right.
Negative one that shouldn't be repeated.
Yeah, so I'm sorry to bring that up. I want you to go back to where you were, but I think it's important to kind of point out that if you've never been in that situation, expect to get in there at some point.
Right. And then, so how do you deal with that? And the repercussions from that were quite negative, and you were looked at a different way, which is really unfortunate. So that person wasn't open to having a dialogue with you, a reasonable dialogue in terms of the fact that boundaries do need to be set, and that you're not at somebody's beck and call 24/7.
That's
just
right.
It's just not realistic, and that's a really strong contributor, unfortunately, to why we have these dysfunctional teams.
Right.
So when teams do become dysfunctional, it can in fact take a while to turn them around. It's not something that is an overnight sensation that can happen, and quite frankly, there are signs also that can give people clues before we start getting into some of the solutions. I want to point out to people some additional signs that I have found are things to be aware of that may be taking you down that path where you don't want to go to be on that dysfunctional team. So the first one is a lack of performance is one of the telltale signs, whether it's individually by somebody on the team or whether it's a contribution on the behalf of everybody on that team. Another one is a breakdown in the day-to-day communication. So clearly, this person that was your boss that was calling you at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, they could have easily talked to you during the middle of the day, I'm sure of it. But that's a great example of a breakdown in communication.
Sure.
And it can happen on so many other different types of levels, but we'll stick with that one for now. The other one is trust is limited, or perhaps, unfortunately, non-existent. And when trust starts to break down amongst a team, that's when the team goes into hyper mode of being very dysfunctional, because just nothing can really get accomplished.
Well, you're not a team anymore, Murph.
You're not a team
you are
anymore.
now, you've got 5 individuals, 8 individuals. You become, in the old Red Sox days when they had a bad man, 25 players, 25 different cabs, taxis type of thing.
Sure.
That's what happens. You become very individualized and not team-oriented.
Exactly. And then the team, unfortunately, the norm for them is that they're in a constant state of chaos. And who wants to be in a constant state of chaos? That's just the epitome of dysfunctional on any level, whether it be on a team or in life. Nobody wants to be there. And then I'm going to do something a little different that you're not going to expect.
All right,
so you
fire
get ready?
away.
So this one has to do with RESPECT. Forget about it. It doesn't exist on a dysfunctional team. There's no respect. So how did you like that little singing bit?
Yeah, well, I first of all, I almost fell backwards. I don't have a stool here that will hold me up. But
I don't want to throw
why don't
you
we
off
stick
too
to the
much,
marketing side of things? You're a lovely person,
I'm not
but
gonna
your
sing
voice
anymore.
sucks,
How's
right?
that?
How's that? So those are all great. I just want to talk about one of them.
Sure.
The people that can bring down a team, whether it's one person or two, whether the individuals, normally what I've seen, whether when I was a salesperson and a manager, is a person that's not making their individual goal. There's either two ways to go about it.
Sure.
Hey, I'm going to work my butt off and I'm going to ask you for help to help me get over that hump so that I can make my quota. How do I make my number? And I'm committed to you and committed to this team.
Yes.
That's one way to look at it.
That's one way.
The problem is the negative person that wants to bring down the team doesn't look at things that way.
Sure.
They don't look in the mirror. We've talked about that in many episodes
That's right.
previously.
That's
So
right.
what they do is they look at you and say, hey, Murph, you suck. You're a terrible leader. And then they go to lunch and they start talking about to the other team members they may be with. And then it gets them thinking. And then all of a sudden the morale, the trust, the respect goes bye-bye.
The poison starts to
So
come
then,
out.
right. And so then what happens, Murph? Either they start building a case. These people might start thinking, I'm not really at my number. Maybe it is Eliot's fault.
Sure.
And let's get them out the door.
Well,
we're going to find a way to get them out the door. In the old days, that was a little more challenging, right? Like, hey, I mean, good. Now, we have open doors, and I'm not saying human HR departments are bad at all. I'm not saying that. I want to be clear. I think they're great, and I think they're important.
We need them. We need them as partners, and we need them to act as partners, true partners.
Partner,
They need
not,
to,
the employee said that you're
Us
mean,
against them,
and I'm
right.
not making my number because of you. And
That's right.
You said something that you shouldn't. You said, our performance isn't right, and you didn't say it
Exactly.
nicely, and we're going to move you out the door, Eliot. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the challenges.
I'm with you on that. So we've talked a lot about the challenges, and so I like to also provide people with solutions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the solutions that are out there as possibilities for you to apply if in fact you're on this dysfunctional team or when you'll be on this dysfunctional team. Keep these in mind.
Sure.
So the first one is to ask perhaps somebody from another team that's being run really well, or take a look at and model from some of the behaviors that are going on that team. Either take literally some time to have a conversation with the leader of that team or members of that team, or a combination, and let it be known that you're looking for some advice from them in terms of how to make your team resemble more of what their team looks like, because they look like they're doing the right thing.
Sure.
So that's one of the suggestions. Another suggestion would be to have your colleagues just come up with a very, just agree to be in a neutral place, agree to have a neutral conversation, and agree that there are problems, and get maybe not only the manager but the rest of the team together in a neutral location where you can have a conversation about everybody agreeing that something's not working, something's not right, so that everyone can put all their grievances out on the table, and so that people can air their differences and get their frustrations out and start having an open dialogue.
Right.
Because when you don't do that, everything's getting pent up, and there's more frustration that's occurring, and the communication starts to break down, that trust starts to break down, and the whole team starts to spiral out of control into that negative, dysfunctional place. The other thing that I suggest to people is to have an open dialogue, each member of the team, with the leader, and to ask that leader if in fact they would rate the team at what level of dysfunction, potentially, if they're in agreement, that they're at, and 10 being the highest. Now, most managers, if they're just being polite, or leaders being polite, they may say something like a 7, when in fact, you're not really there. It's a lot higher than that, but they're just trying to be politically correct. So, and safe. And that's not going to get you to where you need to be to come out of this dysfunction. So what do you do from there? What if that was the case?
Okay, so we've done a lot of episodes, and I'm being sincere when I tell you that may have been the 3 or 4 best solutions you've presented, because you always try to present solutions every week. I thought they were awesome. And what I've seen is if we can incorporate everything into one. Everything it sounds easier than it is.
It's a lot harder
to say, let's get off site. So for me, I love the idea of doing these 2 things. Keep it simple, right?
Go to Switzerland if you can.
Yeah, that'd be great, right? Sure. Incorporate these. Let's get off site. We do before you get in with me, and get everybody off site, bring another manager in or another leader that is well respected within the organization. Everybody checks your ego at the door. We check negativity at the door. Everything's checked.
That's right.
You're going to have your opportunity to talk, speak.
You come in your vanilla.
That's right. We're
profile.
Vanilla. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the way it
Neutral.
is. And we want to kind of do that icebreaker.
Yes.
To lighten the mood a little bit.
That's right.
And then you get down to business.
Yes.
And you start talking, and you got your stickies all over the room, right? And it sounds old-fashioned whether you're using the whiteboards now and doing things, and then figure out a way from there. Then I would incorporate, when you talk about doing your one-on-ones every week and meeting with your team, meet with your team, get what their true feedback was one-on-one, because some people do. From that meeting, make sure you're taking copious notes on that, and then incorporate with everybody on the team. And then in your next team meeting, on-site, like you do every week, Murph, then start incorporating and say, this is what I took. It was important. I heard it from all of you. This is how we are going to move forward. These are your suggestions, not mine. And put it on them.
Right.
And let's move forward together.
And you can't just pay lip service to that as a leader, and the team has to hold the leader accountable to following through and not just giving this a one-time brush in terms of addressing the fact that the team is having challenges.
So how do we do it?
And so there are other ways to do that. Turning a team around takes time, so you have to commit to the fact that A, you're agreeing, yes, we have a dysfunctional team. B, yes, we want to do something about it. C, we're going to come up with a plan to turn it around. And D, we're going to implement that plan. And so the leader really has to make sure that they've gotten buy-in from the rest of the team in a very sincere way to make this happen. Because if everybody isn't on board, then you're not going to get to the place that you need to be. So you need to start building the team back up and start actually hopefully liking one another. One of the suggestions that I make that say, for example, when you're off in this at least Switzerland mind-like place where you're in a neutral state of zone, you talk to one another and tell one another at least one thing that you admire or appreciate about that team member to set the tone. That's another thing that can be done.
Right.
And so that's really critical to be making that adjustment towards turning that team around from being dysfunctional. Then your HR team or human resources capital team, it's called a number of different things today, is definitely somebody, as you suggested, that should get involved. And if they don't feel as if it's something that they have the expertise to do, they should absolutely not hesitate to go to the outside to work with somebody who's a professional that can address the challenges of a dysfunctional team, because it's not something that all HR professionals are comfortable with. It's crisis management, and it's dealing with human emotions that they may not necessarily be skilled enough to be able to handle that.
And what I've heard about that real quick is that people always say, if you go to HR and they may say, we don't have it in the budget. Well, do you have it in the budget to lose $20 million a quarter or not?
Right.
Because if we're generating a lot of revenue and then all of a sudden we're not, we need to get that team back in order. We need to work together. It's not just my team.
That's right.
It's all of these teams.
Well, and every team, even if they don't have a number assigned to them, if they're not on a sales team,
it doesn't matter,
is contributing to the overall company number, but just indirectly. And so that's important to consider. So every team, regardless of what title they're wearing on their team badge, is important. The other thing is to make sure that take a hard look at yourself, whether you're the leader or a member on that team, and make sure you're not, in fact, contributing to that team being dysfunctional. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and that's really critical, because sometimes we project on other people the way that maybe we are actually behaving ourselves, and that's not the case.
That's right.
So put up that mirror and make sure that you're not the one causing this team to be single-handedly dysfunctional, whether you're the leader or a member on the team, or if you have another friend that you're helping to poison and to make this team dysfunctional.
Absolutely. So when I talk about when you come in after that meeting, we go off-site, we got all these good things, and then you do the one-on-ones with the team, well, who's doing your one-on-one?
That's right.
I found success by asking the team in the team meeting, I'd like to do I want you guys to conduct the one-on-one on me right now.
Sure.
And turn the tables.
Sure.
And it does wonders, because they're like, wow, all of a sudden we're valued. The questions we're at, and then they may hold those answers.
That's right.
Hold you to those answers.
That's right. Well, and it gives that person, the leader, so much more insight that they don't always have.
Right.
Because most people are concerned about speaking up. They're often afraid to really tell that person what they think. But it could be really beneficial and helpful.
Absolutely.
And so therefore it's up to the leader to have as open an environment to make people feel as if they are capable and not going to be penalized for bringing truth to them.
Absolutely.
And any strong leader, any leader that's worth their weight, is going to set up an environment that's going to allow people to have an open dialogue. So we could go on for hours on this topic, and I hope that some of the suggestions that we've both brought up today will be helpful to those people that, if they're suffering on a dysfunctional team right now, can take advantage of. So just in winding down, I think I want to let people know that there is hope, in fact, for you if you are on one of these teams. Don't give up. It's really easy to give up. But if it gets to the point where it's really impacting your health, mentally, physically, then you need to potentially think about doing something about it if you've exhausted all the other possibilities.
That's right.
So thank you so much for this fantastic show today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really appreciate
it was a good show.
You being here. Thank you. And stay tuned, everybody, for lots more shows to happen and a lot of other interesting, intriguing topics to be coming towards you in the future. Take care.